Hello, everyone. In today's video, we're going to be getting started on probably one of the most complicated topics in programming as well as Python, and that is classes. Whereas all this other really fun stuff that we've been doing all this time has been relatively straightforward. This is when things kind of change and they get a little bit more abstract and a little bit harder to follow. The syntax also gets a little more complicated. That being said, once you kind of get the hang of classes, you will never go back and do things the way you used to do because it's so effective. So first of all, let's go ahead and think about objects versus classes here. Now, believe it or not, we have already seen several objects in Python. One of the most interesting type of object that we've been using quite a bit of recently is actually a string object. So, if I did something like my string equals a hello, for example, this actual thing we have here, we're actually creating an instance of a string object, and we're actually setting its value to hello. And now, one of the things I actually find very interesting about this is we actually have a lot of properties built into it. That's actually really handy. For example, I can say my underscore string dot lower, and you're sitting there going, wait a minute, I thought that was like some specialized command. Actually, it is a command. It is actually a function. We're in this particular case, yes, a function, not a method, of a string object that conveniently returns the hello statement here that is the general contents of that string. So believe it or not, you've already worked with objects before. You just might not have realized that that's exactly what they are. So if we want to build our own object here, we're going to be using something called a class. Now, a class is basically a skeleton. The best way I like to think about people when they're thinking of classes is imagine if you had a pipe, for example. How could you describe the pipe? What would be the nature of the pipe? What would be the things the pipe could do or not do, or what you're not supposed to do with a pipe? That's a different issue. And if you can imagine things like that, you're going to have a much easier time doing it. So let's go ahead and create our first class together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class by typing in class, and I'm simply going to name the class object. This is going to be, if you want to think about it, what I'm going to be creating. So in this case, I'm going to go for everybody's favorites example. I'm going to create a student. Now, what you notice about my student class here is I'm using a capital S. That's kind of the universal way to say you're dealing with objects. You're not dealing with something as simple as, just like a string or whatever, which ironically is an object. I know. So when I create this, you'll notice right away Python gets grumpy at me saying, hey, buddy, there's supposed to be something here. Yeah, there is supposed to be something here. Not only is there supposed to be something there, but we're also supposed to go ahead and put something into this so that we can actually utilize it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you kind of the broken way to do this so that you can kind of understand why they're so useful. And I'm simply going to type in the word pass. Now, this is so naughty because basically we created an object that contains nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and give myself a couple spaces here. This is the world's lamest object ever created in Python. It's called student, but it does nothing. Now, if we wanted to make an instance of this object, if we basically wanted to use this framework we created to actually have something we could generate, we could do that. So for example, I'm going to go with Marv today, because why not? Marv equals student. So what I've just done is I've just created an instance of my student object named Marv. Now, Marv is now its own object. It is now one of these students that I created this little framework for up above here. Nothing's going to happen, of course. For example, if I were to come over here and try to print Marv, this is kind of interesting. If I run this code here, you will see that it is a student object. And of course, it's going to give you the references. Once you get really complicated in Python, you get to do things like pickle these later on. But don't worry about that yet. That'll make you crazy. So there's really not a lot going on here. I printed Marv, and of course, it just tells me it's a student object, which is cool. Now, would it be cool if we could somehow associate or add some items to Marv? Yeah, we absolutely can. So for example, I could come in here and say marv.name equals Marv. Now, if I come down here and print Marv, you expect it to say Marv. But again, you will see that we're getting the student object. What we just did is we took that object and we took this value and we set it equal to this. So now there is a string object that is inside of the name. Now you're looking up here at my class here going, okay, that's okay. So what if I wanted to get that value back out? Well, that would be easy. I could just come down here and say marv.name. Now, if I were to run this code, you will see now it says Marv. And the reason for this is because we took that object, we associated this into this property of that object, and now we're printing it out. You're like, oh, that's kind of cool. Can we just go hard on that? Sure. We can do a marv dot GPA equals 3.8. Marv's pretty capable here. So I could come here and say marv dot GPA, and if I run this, you would get marv 3.8. And of course, we're professionals here, so we're going to say marv. We'll go ahead and put the name. We'll do like all pretty like this, and you can immediately see just how insanely valuable these things are. GPA, do one of those. I hate it when it does that. I get why it does that, but I don't like it when it does that. Now, if I run this, you'll actually see marv GPA. Isn't that awesome? So you're sitting here going, well, that's cool and all, and I like how you're able to make like these fancy little values, but like, what am I gonna where do I go from here? This doesn't seem that useful yet. We're getting there. Hold your horses. So let's go ahead and create somebody else here. We have a marv, so of course we're gonna go with something really nice here. We'll do what could be fun here. We'll do a Lori today. Oh. Let's see, Lori, I'll do Peter Lori. Lori equals, let's see, we'll make it a student object here. And then we'll say Lori dot name equals Lori. And of course, we'll say Lori dot GPA equals 3.63. Why not? Because science. And of course, we can come down here and now we could print this. And we'll come down here, Lori dot name. We'll come over here. We'll delete this one and we'll say Lori dot GPA. If I were to run this now, you will see it gives me this nice little detailed component down here. I've got a name and I've got this. Now, what you're probably sitting here going is saying, this feels tedious. Like, I feel like you're like working a little hard to put all these together. And if I would have to somehow create like a variable for each one and then have to and put all the different values in, and also what if I accidentally did this when I was typing it in? It'll explode because GPA isn't recognized, GA isn't recognized. This is kind of messy. I like what you're trying to do here, but it's like, is there a better way? And the answer is absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a better student class here. So I'm going to go down a little bit. So I'll give myself just a tiny bit of room. And again, you can see that it works pretty good. All those attributes we can just reach in and kind of do stuff into them. And they all work really, really well. So one of the things we can do with classes is we can create something called a constructor. My Java friends, of course, you're familiar with constructors because you have to make about 30 different varieties of constructor to get anything done. So let's go ahead and create a student class, but we're going to do a better student class. I'm going to call this one better students. Ew, camel case, gross. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a constructor. Now, the constructor inside of Python is basically there to put together the initial little operations and components of my individual class. So to do this, we're going to type in def for define, _init for initialize, and what you'll notice is it already expects the rest of it to go along with it. So I'm going to do a couple more of these. Left parentheses, I'm going to put self. Now this is where the magic happens. We can now define some variables that we can actually add directly into our program here. So what I want to do here is I'm going to define a couple variables. I'm going to do student name. I'm also going to add student GPA. I like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and press the enter key. Now, the cool thing here is it's now looking for what we want to initialize in our particular object when we generate it. So in this case, there's a couple things I want. I want a student name, so I'm going to type in self.student name, because remember, you're attaching this to the actual instance of the object, not the class. We'll do that later, don't worry. And of course, we're going to say self.student GPA. We want GPA in this particular case equals student GPA. Now, your brain is going, whoa, slow down, my friend, slow down. What's going on here? So what we're going to do is we're going to take the student name from the user and we're going to shove it in to that instance of the object's student name variable. We're going to do the same thing with our student GPA a moment later as well. So I'm going to go ahead and give myself some enters and let's go ahead and recreate those students, but let's take advantage of the fact we now have ourselves an actual working constructor here. So what I'm going to do is I'll create ourselves a new student here. We can actually overwrite Marv if we wanted to. I won't do that to you, Marv. I'm sorry, buddy. Let's go ahead and say Tim equals a better student, left parenthesis. Now we have to define these two values. We need to give the student a name and we need to give them a GPA. So this guy is going to be Tim, no time. I'll do that a million times. And my GPA, we'll do a 2.9. Why not? Now, one of the cool things here is when I create this new instance of the object, you'll see that it actually, this is PyCharm, not all of them will do this. It'll actually break it down by what I'm feeding into it. You can see I've got a Tim, you can see I've got a GPA there, kind of ready to rock. Everything's looking really, really good. So let's go ahead and create another one. Let's see here. We'll do Carol this time. Why not? We'll do better student. Better student, left parenthesis. This is going to be Carol. And Carol's really, really good. There we go. Nice job, Carol. And you can see here that I've basically done the same thing as I've done up here, but I've done it basically with the default components that I have. It's yelling at me because I didn't have extra space. I've done it with the default components that are actually built into this class itself to make it a little bit cleaner. Now watch how easy it is to get values out of that class. Now if I did Tim. Actually, what we could do is we could steal this. We could grab tim.gpa, we could do one of those parent, and we don't want Lori.name here. We want tim.name. We want tim.gpa. We'll copy all of this again. We'll go ahead and paste this down below. Helps if you get the right number of parentheses the first time. This is going to be Carol. We're going to come over here. We're going to do carol.gpa. Press enter so it doesn't yell at me. Press enter. Oh, look at how much nicer that is. So you can see how incredibly useful that little constructor is just for kind of generating those different things. Now, the cool thing with these parameters is because this is handled the exact same way, yeah, it's going to yell at me because it's uppercase. Since this should be exactly the same style as regular functions, because you recognize we have a function definition on the front, we can do all sorts of really, really fun things with this. For example, I can set a default student name. I can have a default student name of student, and I can have a default GPA of 2.5 or something like that. Now, the reason this is so cool is if I create myself an empty student, finger quotes, without putting anything inside the parameters, it'll automatically default to these two values, making our life really, really easy. So if I say, let's see here, we'll pick on somebody I haven't seen in a long, long time. We'll do a Brett this time. And if I type in better student and put nothing in the parentheses, since we're using a default function for our default parameters up here, it'll actually assign Brett, our instance of the object, these values. So if I were to actually come down here like this, if I were to come in here and type in Brett, again, this is our character here. If we do Brett, if I run this now, check it out. Uh-oh, it's going to throw at me. Brett student to name. Oh, student name. Umamo. Sorry about that. Yeah, so my mistake here was student name is the actual name of the element that comes out of that class. Sorry if I confused anybody. But one of the things you'll see here is if I come down here, you can actually see that my student, my actual student, my default value here is like this. And one of the things that's so cool about that is, let's say I want to create another student here. Let's see, I will do Kim. Why not? I'll do better student one more time. And this time we'll just initialize the GPA. Actually, we'll just initialize the name. So I'll say student name equals Kim. I'll leave the GPA alone. Now, if I were to come down here and print again, notice I fixed my little boo-boo there. I could actually come into here and type in Kim instead of using our good friend Brett there. Now, if I were to go ahead and run this, you will see that Kim is now going to be the name because we overrode the name parameter, but you'll see that the GPA stays the same. Now, one of the cool things that we have built in here is we can now change those values just like we changed them up above. For example, I could do something silly like this. I could say Kim.student GPA equals 4.0. Good job, Kim. So now if I were to print Kim.student GPA, you would actually see that the original value that we initialized was 2.5. Now it has become 4.0 because we overwrote that particular value that we have inside of our little class. You can already start to see just how incredibly useful these are, how we can kind of reach in and grab these values. But it gets better. One of the things you're probably observing here is we've got a lot of variables just kind of hanging out, and it's kind of a pain in the butt to basically go through all of these and kind of generate them one at a time. Wouldn't it be nice if there was another way to do it? Yes, absolutely. So objects can be stored in any of Python's built-in structures, which means we can have a list of objects. You start to see what I'm going to do there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's have some fun. I'm going to import random. And basically, I need the random to get myself some random numbers here. I'm going to go ahead and create myself a quick little list of 10. And I'm also going to create myself an empty list called students. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, we'll call it temp student. We'll just call it temp. Equals, let's see here. This would be better student. And for the student name, we're just going to pick a random number. I'll do n1 equals random.randint. 1 to 1,000. We'll do 1 to 99. Keep it simple. And n2 equals random.random. Oh boy, here we go. Let's see here. We're going to take 0 to 1 and times 4. That should work pretty well for us. So what I can do is I can actually generate a list of my students here. So watch this. So we're going to use those two elements to actually generate a better student. And then we're simply going to add that student that we just created onto my students list. See how fun this gets? I'm going to go ahead and append temp there. So now what I've done is I will generate 10 students with random numbers here and throw them into my list called students. Now, if I run this, of course, nothing's going to appear at the bottom. So now this would be the mistake everybody would make. They do something like this. Now, if I run this, you will see I get all the student objects I just created a few moments ago, and you kind of see that's not really doing me any good there. However, what if I wanted to print the names of all of my students and their GPAs? Well, remember a little while ago when we used for loops to go through lists? Let's do that. So I'm going to say for student in students. Now remember, this is going to use student, which is going to be each individual element inside of my list, each student object. I'm going to go ahead and print their name and GPA. Let me grab this real quickly here. Let me borrow that for a second. We don't want Tim.studentName. We want student.studentName, because remember, student here is actually a stand-in for the actual name of that object. And of course, I'm going to come over here and I'll say student.studentA. So let's go ahead and run that real quick. And what you'll observe is I have 10 random students with some of the worst GPAs I think I've ever seen. Oh my goodness, look at that. We have somebody with a 0.3 GPA. Ouch, that's a 3. Oh, okay, so this one's pretty good. But yeah, my class is not the strongest class. And also the names of my students, I'd have a really tough time identifying students by number. That would make me slightly insane. So as you can see, classes are incredibly powerful as far as being able to go ahead and create different elements and actually add all sorts of fun properties and attributes to them. We've also seen down below just how easy it is to toss these things into lists and basically move around them very, very smoothly, very, very quickly. And we can also, again, this is a nice little review of things we saw before. Now, of course, you're sitting here going, this is pretty good. I like the cut of your jib here. I have a feeling that this is going to get a little more complicated. It is going to get more complicated. But the very concept of it that you can kind of see here in my little code, and again, you have a copy of my code down in the comments below, should be enough to kind of get you started with classes. Enjoy.